I should buy some old Ted cars. Welcome back to the age of jive. Everybody's talking about the new sound, funny, but it's still rock and roll to me. I actually did that 5 or 6 times to get it right. And I've done the whole video 4 or 5 times because I want to get this one right. And when I say that, what I mean is I want to be honest about how I feel about what we did and what I did. Because I do. I look back at the pain and the suffering and the losses of the finances that occurred beginning in 2014. And it brings me a moment of pause of what kind of a person I am that would do that. And the answer is, it was someone who was angry, and it was someone who was very afraid. And so if it's a cautionary tale, try not to be too angry, and try not to be too afraid. Because despite all that, there were a number of things that went on in this period that were, quite interesting in the first half of 2014. So I'd been installed as the executive director for the state of Wisconsin, a Libertarian Party, and my job was to run the campaigns. And I really did mean to look for another candidate. I didn't take this position to make myself the candidate for governor, because the fact of the matter is, I can really piss people off with what I say. And the last thing that I needed was an entire state that no longer wanted to have anything to do with me because of something I had said as a candidate at the very top. And so I looked around. I spoke to one gentleman, Josh. He was unable to do it. Although he was from Madison, he was, for tax purposes, a resident of Texas, and so he was ineligible. And we had a perennial candidate, and as it turned out, as we will find out later, he was not a libertarian. He was a classic, what did he call himself? A classic conservative. Libertarian is a classical liberal. Classical conservative is something completely different. And so he was not on my list of candidates. Nice enough gentleman. Not a libertarian. We're trying to send libertarians to the front lines. And he also didn't like the plan, so putting him at the top didn't make any sense. And so our goal that year was to put as many people on the ballot as we could. And so I set up some committee groups. One group just to help with petitioning, how to get the petitions, how to fill them out properly, how to get the right ones in your hands. I was speaking directly with candidates, and then I had another individual who did part of the other work and additional work on my campaign named Andy. And Andy emerged really early in the campaign in 2014 season, wanting to run either for the assembly seat or congressional seat in Milwaukee where he lived, or he was considering running for the Secretary of State, which is what he actually ended up running for. And he did a great job. And so what was neat about Andy was he had this just deep voice. And if you heard him on the phone and you listen to just, how well put together his thoughts were. He was a very bright guy. You'd have thought he was 40 or 45. And I've actually had people go, oh, Andy was much younger than I thought. Yeah, he was. It's 2022, I think, at the time. And Andy and I became very good friends. And we both did a lot of the campaigning together, including an event in Milwaukee. And we did our videos with Wisconsin Public Television together. And a number of other things. But it was the first time I'd met someone who had the ability to drop libertarian about as well as anybody that I could see. There were 2 stories from this part of the campaign that I'd like to share because they were formative ones. And the first one was why I ran. And that was, as I decided that Josh was no longer the candidate and no other candidates were presenting themselves for me to recruit, I thought, well, what does a candidate really need to have for qualifications in order to run for governor? Hey, what's Scott Walker's resume look like? So I pull him up on Wikipedia. And you have to remember, at this point, I've seen some synchronicities in my life. I've experienced it a little bit, not a big deal, but noteworthy. So I pull up Scott Walker's, Wikipedia page, and first of all, the first thing I notice is his birthday is November 2nd. which was the same birthday as my best man, who is now working for the Walker administration and was probably working on the campaign. And so, oh, okay, that's odd. That's interesting. I'm sure they had a good laugh about that. Of course, Scott Walker, Scott Walker also went to Marquette University, which I knew, but he went there the exact same years as the next door neighbor's son, whose father was the lawyer who handled my adoption, whom I grew up next to. Okay, that's weird. And then it really kind of started to freak me out, because it turned out that Scott Walker's family in 1967, when he was born, lived in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which was where my mother was from. She was only 14 then, and knew nobody, I think, as far as we know, from the Walker family. But it was just, suddenly you had my attention. And then in 1971, the Walker family, his father, got a new job as a pastor. And he got that job in Plainfield, Iowa. And my mother, after becoming pregnant in Colorado Springs, was moved to Plainfield, Illinois. And so right about there, I jumped out of my chair. Yeah. And yeah. And when you coupled that with the fact that Mary Burke was the presumptive Democrat, a woman whose last name was the same as mine, I remember sitting there and going, oh my God, I don't want to run for governor. I don't. But man, the synchronicities were so deep. And so, I kind of took that and took a deep breath and decided to announce that I was willing to run as the candidate. And to be honest with you, wasn't that hard to do. And I was grateful for that, because it made running the campaigns much easier. An outside guy had come in and fundraised to pay for signature gatherers, and so I wasn't going to have to gather my signatures. I did gather signatures for myself, and I did that at a number of events over the period, and one in particular was at a march down in Milwaukee in the spring. I believe it was in May of 2014. And afterwards, I had gone to I'd gone to a head shop where they were having a grill out, and I had sat down and I was chatting with some folks around the bench, about just the lunacy of the war on drugs. And the woman across from me said, can I tell you my story? And I said, yeah, I'd love to hear it. Let me know what happened. And she says, and she's probably in her late 30s, early 40s. She says, my husband and I were sitting in our apartment, smoking a bowl, which we'd done before. And the neighbors called the police. And so the police come, and they broke in the front door. And she said they arrested me and my husband. And then when she went into work on Monday, a job she'd had for 13 years with nothing but excellent reviews, fired her. And then, of course, because of the drug conviction, she lost her housing. So, she was on state health insurance now. Probably took some health. I believe she needed some state aid of other types. And, of course, she had to pay for the door. I wrote a letter to the editor of a local paper, and I think I sent it around the state at the time. Because, as I said in the letter, we all lost. All of us. And like the Narcan, legalizing marijuana in the States today is just an acknowledgement you were wrong the whole time. And the reason we don't change laws is not because we know it's wrong to keep the laws the way they are, but because the dissonance of acknowledging how wrong they are is too painful for those who consider themselves in power. And for that reason, you can't change laws. We have to eliminate them. Because the harm, the damage of trying to put in place things that are going to be good for people could take years, if not decades, breaking through other people's fear. You see, that was one of the things that I learned, was that we do a lot of things out of fear. And oftentimes, the people who pay the consequences for our fear are people we love and care for very deeply. I need you to consider that in the face of my last story. Because when I began to collect the signatures, I did that first with my buddy Gus over in Appleton. And I remember walking up to the very first house on a Sunday morning about 10 o'clock. And maybe it was 11. I don't think it was that early. I knocked on the door, and to the door came a young black man, child, maybe 10, 11. I asked him if his mom or dad were home and if they could sign the petition, to which his mother came to the door, as well as a number of other children. And she was kind enough to sign my papers. But her son had to walk her through every single cell, including how to spell the name of the street that she lived on and the city. She was profoundly illiterate, and indications were that there was an issue with substance. And I remember walking away from that house and just stopping at the corner and just doing a gut check. And the question was, what can I do for her? The answer is what we can all do for her is to free anyone and everyone who's willing to help. I believe in people. I do. I believe firmly in the goodness of people. I believe in the good things coming. I do. And I believe it's going to be an opportunity for us to let go of a lot of pain. Chance for us to learn a lot about love. To not love less. To love more. Peace. What's the matter with the clothes I'm wearing? Can't you tell that your tie's too wide?